In an era where two-strokes were all the rage and the Japanese hadn't taken over yet, there were only a handful of manufacturers that competed in the Indian two-wheeler market. While the global market was dominated by the European and the Japanese with in-house development, manufacturers in India back then produced bikes under licensing agreement from global companies and made them their own. Such was the case with Escorts Limited, which had a vast experience in manufacturing agricultural machinery to railway equipments. Escorts Group was founded in 1944 by brothers Harprasad Nanda and Yudi Nanda. They first started out with the family-owned business Nanda Bus Company in Jammu. Escorts Limited formed in 1960 after the company set up its manufacturing base in Faridabad and started making X-ray machines to slowly transitioning to make railway equipments, construction equipments, but predominantly being manufacturers of tractors and agricultural machinery. It was only natural that Escorts felt the urge to step into the world of motorcycles with the Rajdoot brand of motorcycles. Launched in 1962, the first model, Rajdoot XLT, was a licensed version of the polish-made SHL M11 of the Soviet era, and its 175cc 3-speed engine produced an estimated 10 horsepower. It featured a leading link suspension up front and was considered the ultimate Soviet motorcycle one could get their hands on. Escorts sold the XLT and Deluxe models in the 60s, and the company slowly adopted the Rajdoot brand as the frontrunner. By the end of the decade, Rajdoots were being sold in massive numbers and were raking in the money for the company. Some years later, Rajdoot came with a 4-speed iteration of the 175 called the Super D175. These bikes were nimble and agile for that day and age, and their reliability made them a favorite among the working class. Rajdoot had made a name for itself for its hauling capacity, so much so that it was oftentimes dubbed as the milkman's motorcycle. These robust little thumpers had carved a niche of their own in a world of Triumphs and Nortons. When they were done selling road-going bikes to the public, Rajdoot would then go on to put their bikes to test by racing them and pitting them against the likes of Java, Yazdi and Royal Enfield. The teams would race their machines for 50 long laps at the Sholavaram track on the outskirts of Chennai during the 60s through the 80s. The Rajdoot won several accolades in the late 70s and early 80s in hill climbs, drag racing and motocross racing. It was during the late 60s that the world was seeing the rise of the Japanese Big Four. They were light, nimble and were reliable than their British counterparts. The Rajdoot's 175cc model had run its course, and Escorts joined the bandwagon with Yamaha in 1981 when they collaborated to launch the RD350 in India. Escorts simultaneously sold their own licensed version of the bike in 1983 known as Rajdoot 350. The production of the RD350 had ended in Japan in the mid-1970s due to stringent emission norms, but it was a technically advanced motorcycle in India during the 80s when emission norms were not mainstream yet. Its 347cc parallel twin 2-stroke engine came with 7 ports and Yamaha's patented torque induction system with reed valves, 6-speed manual transmission and an auto lube system. The engines were in a different state of tune compared to the international models that produced 39 bhp. The carburetors were rejetted for fuel economy rather than performance, and the front disc was substituted for a 7-inch twin leading chute drum brake from the RD350 to cut costs. The high torque model produced 30.5 bhp by restricting the exhaust ports, and the low torque model developed 27 bhp, restricting the ports even further. The RD350 had established Rajdoot as a performance bike manufacturer in India. But the same bike eventually became the reason for the brand's downfall. The RD350 didn't have the same success it received in the international markets, a high retail price and bad fuel economy being the contributing reason. The spare parts were expensive and were not readily available in the market. Maintenance wasn't an easy task as Escorts lacked the service network those days, and there were not enough trained mechanics who could handle its twin-cylinder engine. But most of all, the audience were not ready to handle its outright performance. The two-stroke Screamer turned out to be too powerful for the Indian conditions, unlike any other people had ever witnessed. The sales were at an all-time low, and with the introduction of the fill it, shut it, forget it era, people prioritized fuel efficiency over performance. Owing to the success of the smaller capacity motorcycles in India, Yamaha launched the RX100 in 1984, while Escorts distributed the product. Following the lackluster sales of the RD350, both Yamaha and Rajdoot needed to make a comeback. But Escorts only marketed it as a Yamaha product and never actually came up with their own branding on the bike. The bike became a sensation among the riders. Yamaha was on a roll and had become an established manufacturer in the country. But while the ship sailed smooth for Yamaha, the journey for Escorts came to an end when the manufacturing unit in Faridabad was sold to Yamaha in the late 90s, and Escorts decided to quit the motorcycle business to concentrate on tractors and auto components. The Rajdoot brand had died a slow death as stricter emission norms had killed the demand for two-strokes. Rajdoot has attained a cult status among enthusiasts, and the love for these machines has only grown over the years. It dared to introduce the first true performance bike when the public used to be obsessed with fuel economy. The company anticipated the bright future of the performance-oriented motorcycles, but what they didn't recognize was that the future was green.